see the little recording thing. Okay, I think we are up and running. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. From my living room to your living room, I welcome you all. I am moderating tonight's panel, so please send any questions to me in the chat. I will make sure that our panelists all get a chance to answer. So a little bit about myself. I am a class of 2004 alumnus of Drew University. I majored in political science with a minor in philosophy. I worked for a year before starting law school in 2005 at Michigan State University. In 2005. I graduated in 2008, which was the absolute worst time to graduate in Michigan. I was the class that was surprised by the economic downturn, but it worked out well because I was able to come back to the East Coast. And I started my job at Seton Hall in 2011. I'm now the director of admissions there. I probably have met some of you along the way in my travels recruiting, and I am happy to pass off the introductions to Colin Daniels, one of our panelists.
All right. Hey, everybody. So I'm Colin Daniels. I'm a class of 2005 graduate. Actually knew Katya and Greg very well while I was at Drew. And unlike Katya, I did not take any time off between college. So I started law school in 2005 and graduated in 2008. So like Katya, I picked sort of the worst time to be a law school graduate that you could pick. You know, actually, I started work at a law firm in Manhattan, you know, literally the week before the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy started. And my law firm's office was 2 blocks away from Lehman. So I remember getting off the subway that Monday and seeing people just streaming out of Lehman Brothers, you know, carrying boxes, and there were news cameras everywhere. And it was certainly, you know, a worrying thing to see as a young graduate with about $150,000 worth of law school debt to pay off. And so, you know, I sort of rode that out for the first, you know, 3 to 6 months that I was at my law firm, which was Wilkie Farr. You know, I didn't have a whole lot of work to do because I was in the corporate law department, and there was, you know, there really were no M&A deals happening at that point. You know, so there was, you know, very little to do on my end. And, you know, that was pretty much the case for the first 6 to 9 months. And then, you know, once things started coming back, it was kind of what I expected, which, you know, I'm not sure which one I preferred, to be, you know, very slow or extremely busy, because once it got busy, it was very, very busy. And I ended up staying at Wilkie for about 1.5 years after that. And, you know, things ebb and flow when you're at a law firm, but mostly they flow, and it's, you know, very challenging at times. You know, and so from there, I actually got an opportunity to go in-house on what was supposed to be just a 3 to 4 month secondment to go work at a hedge fund that was a client of Wilkie's, named Monarch Alternative Capital. And I knew nothing about Monarch. I had never envisioned myself working at a hedge fund or doing anything like that. But, you know, I decided to give it a shot and went over there and found that it was way different than anything I expected. The people there were great to work with. The bosses there are completely what you would not expect in terms of, you know, people who run a hedge fund. They're very down to earth and easy to work with. And so while it's, you know, an intense environment and the hours can be long, you know, I found it to be more what I was looking for than working at a law firm, just because you get to work hand in hand with the people who are actually running the business. And there was a little bit more of an opportunity to, you know, to work on the business side than I was getting at my law firm. And I should have said earlier, I was a political science and economics double major at Drew. So this kind of allowed me the chance to, you know, use some of the, you know, the financial and economic, you know, skills that I had learned while I was at Drew. And so I've been at Monarch now for 9 years, which is kind of crazy to say. And at the end of last year, I was promoted to general counsel. So, you know, things have been pretty steady in terms of the workload. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now with, the economic situation in our country and around the world. But things are stable on the work front. So that's I think that's pretty much it. Did I miss anything that I was supposed to hit on?
Thanks, Colin. I'm sure we'll come back to you with some more questions and get some more details. Lina, how about you?
Hey everyone, I'm Lina Martinez, and I was a Drew alum from 2006. I double majored in political science and Spanish, and I also went to law school right from college. I started law school in 2006 and graduated in 2009, which was a very difficult time to start working. I was actually a summer associate at a law firm and given an offer to start work after I graduated. And I saw a lot of my friends in 2009, just their firms were folding or their offers were being rescinded. So it was a very difficult time, but I'd say we weathered the storm, and you learn a lot of things about yourself and your resilience when you're faced with something like that. And so once I graduated law school, I started working at a law firm as a finance associate. And I actually have no background in finance or business or economics. I actually never took an economics class, but I spoke Spanish, and my law firm had a very big Latin American finance practice. And they took a chance and said, okay, well, you speak Spanish, you know the culture, you can speak to our clients, and we'll give it a shot. And so I started my career that way. And I worked at a law firm for about 3 years. And then I went in-house into New Jersey, into a propane retailer, and I'm now at an industrial manufacturer based in Sweden. So my days now are very different from when I was a finance lawyer, but I'm still doing some finance work, but it's also, my day is also sprinkled with other things like employment law and M&A, as well as some safety, health, and environmental, privacy issues. So as an in-house counsel, I'm sort of a jack of all trades now.
Fantastic. Jonathan, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Amira, and I'm sorry I'm trying to dodge the sunlight here. It's 5:45 where I am right now, and the window that's behind my computer is like, it's like trying to hit me. So if I'm like moving back and forth, bear with me. It's getting in my eyes. But anyway, so I studied psychology and Spanish. I double majored at Drew, minored in theater. I graduated in 2010, started law school in the summer of 2011, took a little break in between just to work and save some money and get my applications underway. While I was at Drew, I interned with a personal injury firm in Morristown as part of an independent study externship. And that was experience that I felt helped me in making myself a competitive applicant for law school. I went to Rutgers Camden, graduated in 2014, and after graduation, I actually was part of one of the largest classes in Rutgers Camden Law's history. And so getting jobs even in 2014, right out of the gate at that time, were super competitive. And so you can imagine how competitive it was with a large class like that. And so I just took the time that summer to study for the bar exam. When I passed, I started doing some per diem work for family friends who were attorneys in a bunch of different areas, employment, immigration, and I landed my first job at a general practice small firm in Freehold in 2016 as a junior associate doing municipal court work, immigration, some employment and family. Realized I hated it because I had zero work-life balance, and with the way things were changing politically in the country, it was a very crazy time to work in immigration with the law changing so, or rather becoming to change so so fluidly that it was a very stressful time for a young attorney. And so I eventually landed in the Gloucester County Prosecutor's Office, where I've been doing both grand jury and juvenile work for the past 3 years. In fact, I just hit my 3-year anniversary this past March.
Okay, thank you for that, Jonathan. Before I pass things over to Emily to introduce herself, I want to remind all of you that this panel is only as exciting as the questions that you guys submit. So while Emily is introducing herself, you can start sending messages to me with your questions so we can transition right into a discussion with the panelists. You should be able to select me from the little drop-down menu in the chat screen, and I will get those messages and pass the questions along to our panelists. But before we do that, let's have Emily introduce herself to all of you.
Hey all, my name is Emily Quinlan. I am a 2007 graduate of Drew University. I was a history major, poli-sci minor, and I was also a 4-year member of the women's soccer team. I did also spend a semester in Scotland, so I did have that study abroad experience as well. I went directly to law school after graduating from Drew. I went to Cornell University Law School. I graduated from there in 2010. I was also a victim or an experience. I got to experience the recession while in law school and in my immediate prospects post-graduation. I was interviewing for my 2L summer, which is one of the most important summers for someone who wants to go to a firm, during the summer of 2008 when everything started to crash. And I remember our law school telling us, if you have an offer, you need to accept it now because offers were being rescinded. Again, it was a scary time to be a member of a law school class and be looking for those jobs. I was fortunate enough that I did land a job at a firm in Manhattan doing litigation, both for my summer and then upon graduation, and that was at Caswood Funson, which was at the time mostly focused on litigation. It has since expanded. Most of the work I did in the 3 years I spent there was based on financial services, structured finance litigation, mostly in fact coming out of the recession. And so I did a lot of work related to that, not something I ever thought I would be doing. My clinic in law school was actually prosecution. It was what I had always wanted to do, but I had a job offer upon graduation and a lot of law school debt. And so I took that, I did that for 3 years. I then moved upstate to Albany, New York area, the capital region, where I was at a law firm in that area for nearly 5 years, but still wasn't really doing what I wanted to, and kind of hit this point where I needed to make a decision as to what I wanted to do. Started looking at opportunities and realized that there was an opening in the district attorney's office in Tompkins County, which is where Cornell University is in Ithaca, New York, which is where I had interned and done a clinic back when I was a law student. I applied. I've now been here for almost 2 years, and I absolutely love what I'm doing. The lesson there being that even in the law, I think as everyone has discussed, you can transition what you're doing. You just because of what you're doing immediately after law school even, or what you're doing immediately upon graduation from Drew, you can always change that career path. That's what I was able to do. And we now live in Ithaca, New York, and I've been a prosecutor for 2 years dealing with everything from low-level violations and misdemeanors all the way up through felonies and appellate work.
Fantastic. So the questions are starting to pour in, which is very exciting. We have a question from someone who is asking about preparing for the LSAT. So only because Colin and I were preparing for the LSAT at the same time, I'm going to pass this off to Colin first. Colin, can you talk a little bit about what you did in terms of studying besides the video game playing, please?
Yeah, I was going to say, according to you, I just played video games, but I remember it a little bit differently. I do remember talking with a classmate of mine at Drew, when we were talking about, different things that we might want to do after graduation. At that point, I hadn't fully committed to the idea of law school. But I'd always been interested in law school, for a lot of different reasons. And she said that she was going to sign up for a Kaplan, LSAT prep class. And, you know, she convinced me to do it also. And it's probably one of the best decisions that I made because, you know, the boost in my score from my initial, you know, practice test to the final result was very meaningful. And so, you know, in terms of test prep, obviously I haven't taken a class with Kaplan in probably 16 years now, but at least at the time, you know, it was definitely worthwhile, and I assume it still is. So I think if you are fully committed to the LSAT and going to law school, it's well worth going with a test prep, you know, service like Kaplan.
Great. I know there's been lots of changes since you and I studied for the LSAT. Emily, you were a more recent law school applicant. What did you do to prepare for the LSAT?
I'm probably not the best person to ask, mostly because I was in the midst of I spent my spring semester of my junior year abroad. And so I did not take the spring LSAT offering. And then I came back. And, you know, I'd always intended to go to law school. I was kind of like, oh, I need to study for that. Bought a book. I believe it was a Kaplan book. Did a lot of the practice, but I ended up actually staying at a friend's house in Scranton, just outside Scranton, Pennsylvania, the night before the bar exam, or before the LSAT, because of the fact that we had a game in Scranton that afternoon, and I had to get special permission to go out and not take the team bus out. But not the best example, but mostly I just did a lot of practice questions, and I did just fine. I only had to take it once, and I know that they've changed them since I take it, so I know that I'm still not even I'm not a most up-to-date person on this.
Yeah, so there's been, the last 2 years have had rapid changes in testing for law school applicants. In 3 years, the LSAT has gone from giving 4 test administrations to 6 administrations to 9 administrations. As of this past July, tests are all now electronic tablet-based tests. So that is a very big change from when all of us were taking the LSAT in preparation for law school. And another big change is more and more schools, including Seton Hall, are now accepting the GRE in lieu of the LSAT with applications. This is significant in current times, mostly because the GRE has already figured out how to administer at-home tests. The LSAC is working on that, but they've canceled the March test and are hoping to have an at-home version for April, but we'll see what happens with that. And my understanding is even before all of this started, more schools in our immediate New York metropolitan area are also going to be switching to accepting the GRE next year. Another big change that has happened for everyone, and I echo what Emily and Colin said, there are a million different ways to study now for the LSAT and the GRE. The most important thing is that you do something to prepare. As Colin alluded to, the increase in score can be worth the investment overall because it can give you opportunities in terms of schools that you're able to attend or scholarship money that you will be eligible for. Probably the most significant and most exciting change, in my opinion, is the LSAC has partnered with Khan Academy. I'm sure many of you know Khan Academy for free LSAT prep. Khan Academy is the only test prep company affiliated directly with the LSAC, which means it's the only test prep company that is actually giving you old LSAT problems to test off of. I always recommend start there. It's free. You can do it on your own time. If you have a tablet, you're actually practicing on the format that you'll be eventually taking the test. Another free resource that anecdotally many students tell me they've had success with is something called 7Sage. Some of you may know that already too. So my advice is to always start with the free options and then decide from there if you need to pay for a class or buy some more books, or you have everything up to a private tutor that will sit with you for hours and walk you through the questions. Let's see, the next question is from someone who's concerned about student loan debts while attending law school. They ask how much debt is too much. I think all of us might have a different answer. Lina, do you want to talk about how you weighed the return on investment of out-of-pocket costs versus paying, going to a school where you had more significant scholarship?
Sure. I went to Fordham in New York, and I lived at home because I grew up in Hudson County, so it was easy to commute from home into the city. So I did save some money there. But I would say that with law school, often where you go to school determines the type of job that you can get. And you want to make sure if you're looking to get those high-paying law firm jobs, you're going to the best school that you can get into. And so that was something that I had thought about. I knew I wanted to work at a law firm first before going in-house. And I looked at, what schools will get me there, because if I can get that type of job, I know I can pay back my debt easier and sleep easier at night knowing that. So I had considered schools in DC and in New York, as well as New Jersey. DC was out of the question after I weighed everything, because it would have forced me to pay living expenses, something I didn't have to do if I stayed in local in New Jersey or in New York City. So I can't tell you how much debt is too much, but I would weigh the caliber of the law school, where those students are going to get their jobs, if they're getting jobs in the places you want to get a job in, so that you can really weigh your prospects of employment to see if you'd be able to pay that debt back.
Jonathan, you graduated and were applying to law school during a time, and I remember this well, during which applicants were very aggressive about asking financial questions about scholarships and loans. What were you concerned with when you were weighing your different options for attending law school?
Sorry, I was just trying to make sure I unmuted myself. Well, my heart was always set on going to Rutgers, and obviously and of course staying in New Jersey, although that pretty much limited me to Rutgers, Newark, and Camden, which were at the time, believe it or not, separate campuses. They've now merged, so it's Rutgers Law School, but you have the option of attending either campus and taking classes amongst the two of them. Don't ask me why it took them this long, but they were well on their way to making it work out by the time I was graduating. So we were like, okay, cool. Or Seton Hall was the other choice. And Seton Hall is a great school. It's a private law school though, so it's going to be more expensive. And so my concern was, of course, I'd be getting just about the same, if not better education from a public law school with a stronger alumni association that would afford me better networking opportunities. Rutgers had that brand name behind it. But again, my heart was always set on practicing in New Jersey too. And so, I wanted to go to a school that had good recognition, was affordable for me. That's not to knock Seton Hall whatsoever. I know I have friends that went to Seton Hall. They got scholarships. They're doing just fine. Seton Hall also has a very strong alumni network. And, but my heart was just set on Rutgers, and that's another story for another time, but they had the programs that I was specifically looking for. I wanted to go into public interest initially. I guess you could say I'm still in public interest, but I'm a state employee. And so it's working for the people in a local county government.
Okay, so Jonathan, that's actually a really great transition to another question that we have from someone who asks how they knew, how you all knew what law school was the right fit for you. And obviously with there only being 2 schools in New Jersey, most of our applicants are also considering one of the Rutgers campuses. And my advice is always to visit, and then that's how you get a feel for the culture of the school. Jonathan, why don't we come back to you and you can talk about, even if it was just visiting the 2 Rutgers campuses, what you paid attention to try and decide what school would be the right fit.
So it was a similar process in how I applied to college, but it was a lot more methodical because I knew these people that were attending these schools were all going to be future lawyers. They were going to be future professional contacts, possibly colleagues. And so you're kind of making a first impression in many ways, but it's also they're making a first impression on you. And of course, they want to share with you everything that's great about their school. And so my story, believe it or not, is I was working at my uncle and aunt had a cafe in Bordentown at the time, and this woman who frequented it was a retired municipal court judge, and I was serving her, and she had asked me, because she saw I had a Drew sweatshirt on, believe it or not, and she knew somebody who was going to Drew. And so we were talking, and she asked me what I was planning to do after college. I was a junior at the time, and I said I wanted to go to law school. And so she was very connected with Rutgers, invited me to a banquet for one of the diversity law student groups as a guest. And I got to meet a lot of faculty and students and just really get a rare opportunity to be in that kind of social environment where there's all these different people and have an opportunity to just ask them, like, what is so great about this place? Like, why should I come here? When you find yourself in that type of situation, it's a blessing to be able to have those kinds of discussions with people. And so when there's, I know at Rutgers, we did something called Dean's Law Day, where it was kind of like a campus open house, and we invited prospective students of all ages. It was kind of like it was just like when we do open houses at Drew. I'm not sure if any of the current students are familiar with those, but it's kind of like a field day. You get to have like one-on-ones with professors and students, maybe attend like a lecture, things like that. So we had something like that. If you know through Drew, if there's I know they have a very strong relationship with Seton Hall. I'm not sure, due to the geographic proximity, what it's like with Rutgers, your campus, if they do any Dean's Law Days there, because again, when I attended, they were separate campuses. So I'm not entirely familiar with how their alumni outreach works on the Newark campus, but I would imagine if they're doing the same thing as we did in Camden, definitely check out if there's some type of undergraduate outreach like we did with Rutgers and Dean's Law Day, or try and connect with an alum on Drew Connect and ask them, if you can look on Drew Connect if there's a specific school they went to that perhaps maybe you're interested in because they have a specific program or something, or you want to practice in, say, California or Texas because there's a budding area of law going on over there. That's one way to get your foot in the door, and just behold yourself to, if you make an appointment with one of these alums, make sure you hold yourself to them. Again, you're also fostering a potential long-term professional relationship at this phase in your academic and your professional career. It's not like Tinder or Bumble or anything like that. You can't just swipe left and then stand us up on the coffee date. We're going to remember that. So just make sure when you reach out, you hold yourself to your phone appointments. If you need to reschedule, just make sure you hold yourself to that rescheduling. And we're here for you.
All right, I'm going to give the same question to Emily, but I want to add another layer to it. So not only how did you know when you had found the right law school for you, but how did you decide that law was going to be the right next step for you?
Thanks, Katya. So I applied to a bunch of law schools, mostly on the East Coast. I ended up going to the best law school I got into, but partially that was because they also did give me a merit scholarship. So it was weighing the bounds of where I wanted to practice, which was in the Northeast, the level of the school, and then also how much it was eventually going to cost for me to pay for it. All three of those things were really important factors for me in terms of how and what to do. I had actually always wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, always is probably a bit of an exaggeration, but it was something that was an intended career path prior to me entering undergraduate. So before I started Drew, the end goal was always to go to law school. So I took classes that were strong in reading, writing, and research. All of those are things that have always been, I thought would be good and helpful in law school, and it turns out they are, as those were skills that I was able to develop at Drew that I was then able to use as I went forward in my career and still use today. One of the most important jobs of a lawyer is to be able to read and interpret statutes, and part of that involves doing the research to find the correct statute or case law, and then to apply it to the situation. Both my history and poli-sci classes were very useful in that regard. One thing I will say about where to go to law school, it's really important to figure out where you want to practice, because while there are certain schools that are top tier, Yale, Harvard, you're going to be able to go anywhere in the country with those. To some extent, Cornell, though less so than Yale and Harvard or Columbia even. If you're looking to be in a specific region of the country, you want to go to a law school in that region of the country. I did practice in Albany, New York for almost 5 years. The amount of Albany Law School graduates who practice in the capital region is very high. And they all have a very strong alumni network, and it is very daunting sometimes to break into that collegiality that they have practicing in that area, specifically the capital region of New York State. And that's despite the fact that New York has a large number of law schools within a short distance of Albany. So pay attention to where you want to practice, what type of law you want to do, because different law schools have different focuses. For example, I believe PACE has a very good environmental law program. So if you want to focus on environmental law, and you know that now, even though it's maybe not as highly ranked a law school, if you want to be in the environmental area, it's still a very good law school to go to, and one where you maybe might get more financial aid. So that's kind of what I paid attention to, and what I think is important as you move forward.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a bunch of questions that are all sort of circling around the same issue. So I want to combine them into one broader question. And Emily, you sort of touched on this in your last comment about schools with certain specialties being good fits if you're interested in a specific area of law. My favorite example is if you're interested in maritime law, you want to go to either Roger Williams or Tulane because they are the best programs for that particular niche area of law. But what are programs that people should keep in mind if they are trying to figure out what programs a school offers? And we have a question about whether you study specific areas of law or take a more general approach to the studies. So Colin, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on certain programs that people should keep in mind? And did you choose any specialization while you were in law school?
No, not really. I think, you know, you sort of, at least I found that when you actually go into practice law, you know, you rely on some of the core concepts that you learn in law school, but it's, you know, I haven't really found that, you know, I encounter a situation in my day-to-day work that I can recall learning about in law school. You know, you just, especially if you go into M&A or something in corporate law, you know, obviously if you can take corporate law in law school, that's a smart thing to do if that's what you know you want to go into. But even if you don't, you know, as long as you focus on learning the core concepts of, you know, how to do research, working on your writing, I think, you know, there's your real, you know, specialization will come once you graduate and you figure out, you know, what line of work you actually want to go into. So I actually would view it as law school is sort of the last chance, you know, at least for some decent period of time where you can sort of study anything that interests you, and nobody's going to look down on it, you know. If you're interested in a certain type of law, but you know it's not what you want to do professionally, what better time to study it than in law school? So, you know, in my law school career, I did take corporate law and I took securities regulation, but looking back on it, I don't think it was like a necessity because I don't think it I just don't, I think I could have learned just as much, you know, coming out of law school in the first few months.
Fantastic. Now, Lina, I know Fordham has a lot of concentrations and a lot of clinics. Were you able to take advantage of any of them? Did you choose to do a concentration, or did you do a more general education?
I did not do a concentration. I, like Colin, you know, I mean, let me back up a second. First year of law school, I assume it's still the same, Katya. First year of law school, your courses are given to you. It's a specific curriculum. And then after that, I took courses like corporations, like securities, thinking that this would be helpful for me because I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. But it turns out, at least the way that I saw it, law school really prepared you to be more of a litigator. So those classes were more geared towards litigation in those areas versus being an actual transactional lawyer. So I did take some courses that I was interested in. I was interested in immigration law, and I did also do a clinic, which I highly recommend. I think if you have the opportunity to do a clinic, it's a great way for you to actually start being a lawyer, because I think the best way to really learn the law and how it applies to different situations is to actually start working. And with the clinic, you get a client, you're working on behalf of that client. I did an immigration clinic, and I represented an asylum seeker. And by the time the case got to when I started it in the clinic, we were ready to go to court. So that was a really big deal for, you know, a third-year law student right before I was about to graduate and start working. It gave me some confidence that I could do this. So I would highly recommend, if you can do a clinic, do the clinic. And then, and I don't know that there needs to be any specialization specifically, but enjoy taking classes that you think you're interested in, and anything. And I also took some courses that were relevant to the bar.
Emily, I saw you nodding vigorously before, and if I remember correctly from your introduction, you did a clinic that ultimately landed you your job, correct?
Yes, that's right. So like I said, I had always been interested in criminal law specifically. Didn't do it for the first 8 years of practice because of all sorts of circumstances. But I did a clinic in law school called the prosecution clinic, which was basically prosecuting traffic tickets and local law violations. Prosecuted a lot of undergraduate Cornell students for underage possession of alcohol, unfortunately. But the idea behind that being that I actually got to be in a courtroom. I stood up in a courtroom, I prosecuted traffic tickets, as silly as that sounds, which gave me the experience of both doing direct and cross-examination and what I wanted to ultimately do. And also, like you said earlier, gave me the confidence that I could actually do this in the real world. And I was lucky enough that I enjoyed it enough actually being in a courtroom that I then continued through the spring semester of my 3L year, my last year of law school, working directly with one of the assistant district attorneys in Tompkins County, and got to do some hearings of a little bit higher level cases. Because of that experience, when I saw that there was an opening at the Tompkins County District Attorney's Office, I reached out to the ADA who had supervised me at that point 8.5 years, 9 years earlier, and asked if he thought it was worthwhile for me to apply to the position, given that I had no substantive criminal law experience post-graduation from law school. We had a bit of a chat. He said yes. I forwarded my materials, as well as applying through the county government portal. And because of that, I was able to land the position that I have now. And so not only did it give me some experience and confirm for me that it was what I wanted to do, even though it took me a while to get back there, it also gave me those connections to be able to reach out 8.5 years later and get a job that I really wanted.
Great. Jonathan, did you do any concentration or any certificate program through Rutgers? And did you do any of the clinics?
No, I didn't really concentrate on anything specific. I kind of just got through my first year courses, and then kind of just sort of bounced around and took classes in areas that I thought I would like. And I feel like that was a very good teachable moment for me, because I thought with my theater background that I'd be interested like in entertainment law or IP or contracting. And it turned out that those subjects were really dry and boring. And I realized I was not, you know, I like being on stage. I prefer to do a little litigation. I was not cut out for transactional work and sitting behind a desk all day. And so taking those classes, it's good to take classes just to try them out. You know, you may learn something new, but it's also good to take something that you might find completely like out of the blue, something that you weren't expecting to be, you know, a good experience. And one of those for me was complex civil litigation. I mean, the class title didn't really sound all that sexy to me, but it turned out it was actually very useful for me because at one point before the New Jersey bar exam became the uniform bar exam, it specifically had New Jersey civil procedure on it. I'm not sure if it still does under UBE. I don't believe so. I also tutor the bar exam on the side, and I haven't done it in a while, so I don't recall New Jersey civil procedure specifically being on it, but that class was very valuable to me. And I also really enjoyed the professor who taught that class, and so I did a couple more classes with that professor as well. Because it's like in college, if you gravitate towards a certain professor and their teaching style, you know, that's only a recipe for success. And of course, a professional contact later down the line. In my third year of law school, I joined the immigration clinic, slightly out of desperation. I really wanted to do civil practice, but I got waitlisted. And so when I asked the clinic coordinator, like, well, what else is there available? And she was like, there's the immigration clinic. Do you speak Spanish? And I'm like, yes. And she was like, come back in a few days. I'm going to make a few phone calls. And then I did the immigration clinic. And that was an interesting experience. I really didn't have much of a background in it aside from taking a doctrinal immigration class just out of curiosity. I did okay in it, so I didn't think I was going to, you know, do anything with it. And it turned out I did, but again, I also got that job out of desperation too. But I was also open and willing to learn more about it. And I'm glad it did, because it, at the very least, gave me some fundamental skills in terms of, you know, learning to draft briefs and motions, going to court, all that stuff. And so I felt like as long as you're willing, to be, you know, open and receptive to new experiences, that's going to help you along your way professionally, for sure.
Okay, fantastic. We have a very specific request for a question from Colin. We have a hedge fund groupie in the mix. Someone who is currently taking a class called Hedge Fund Strategies and also interested in law, has a question about what the atmosphere is like working at the hedge fund and how is it different from working at a law firm. And then Lina, I want to direct the question to you next because you are also in-house, so you can also make that distinction. But let's start with Colin.
Yeah, I think, you know, my day-to-day experience is probably fairly similar to most in-house counsel where, and I'll distinguish it from the law firm in this kind of big picture sense. When you're at a law firm, you're on maybe, if it's a particularly intense deal or case, it's probably the only thing you're working on, and you might do it from, you know, the time you wake up until the time you go to bed, if you go to bed. When you're at an in-house, pretty much in any business, you have so many different things, projects, to-dos, you know, to worry about. It's not a single thing that's consuming you daily most times, you know, and so it's almost, I heard one of my colleagues, you know, likened it to working sort of in an emergency room, and it's like triage. You're like, okay, is that's a problem, but that guy's handling that. This is something I have to keep my eye on. And so, you know, you're sort of monitoring what's going on in a lot of different facets. And specific to, you know, where I work at the hedge fund, you know, the biggest change for me was having to train myself to wake up very early because we do a morning meeting every day at 8 a.m. And that was honestly the biggest adjustment for me.
Some things never change.
Yeah, you know, dating back to college, that was like, I specifically avoided classes that would start early. And, you know, when you're at a law firm, it's pretty much, you know, you can roll in at 9:30 in the morning and everyone's fine with it because they know you'll be there until, you know, the sun rises the next day. So, you know, working in-house at the hedge fund, you know, get in early, but you can leave at like a pretty humane hour of the evening. And so, you know, for me personally, it was great in that respect because, you know, you know, I have 2 small kids and it allows me to be home with them for dinner pretty much every night. And, you know,
especially now, right, Colin?
Exactly. Well, exactly. Now it's even easier because I don't have to commute, at least for the next month or so. So.
Okay, Lina, how about you? Do you want to share about the differences you see between working in-house or as corporate counsel versus being at a firm?
Sure. When I was at a law firm, as Colin said, I mean, you'd be working on 1 or 2 big deals. I mean, I guess we were both transactional lawyers. So, you know, you would work really, really hard to close that deal. And once it closed, then you'd wait for the next one to hit your desk. And often the way that it would start would be, Lina, go grab that credit agreement from that other deal and update it with these couple of things. And that's how we would start it. So I realized, you know, you were training to become an expert in your field when you were at a law firm. And I realized it really wasn't what I wanted. And then when I went in-house, I realized, you know, it's every day, it's, as you said, you're putting out small fires because, you know, I'm involved in the business. I am a partner in this business. And before they make big decisions, they want to call legal and find out, can I do this? Whether it's with respect to an issue with our safety people, an issue with our employees, or we had a very big, 2019 was a big acquisition year for my company. So a lot of acquisitions, a lot of diligence, a lot of questions coming in. But while I was working on an acquisition and working to close it, or even while it was closing, my phone was ringing because somebody needed to know if, you know, if they could terminate an employee. And, you know, you're juggling a lot of different things and you're triaging to see what needs to be prioritized right now. And it doesn't matter if you're working on an acquisition, you know, at a law firm. I could say, well, I'm on this deal with this particular partner, and that would sort of shield me from somebody else trying to get me to work on something at that moment. But in-house, we tend to be smaller teams, and we need to sort of handle our work because otherwise it falls onto our colleagues, and they're also strapped. And however, all of that being said, I will also echo Colin's comments that I do leave at a more humane hour. While I can log in, it's very flexible, but when I was at a law firm, I was definitely working very long hours through the weekends, through the nights, into the mornings. So it is a more humane way to work, I would say. I don't know if that has changed since I left a law firm, though.
Thank you so much, both Colin and Lina. I do want to give our last panelist, Toya, a chance to introduce herself. Welcome, Toya. Do you want to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Yes. My name is Toya, and I attended Drew some time ago. I intended to come there as a poli-sci major because at the time, I think Drew was ranked like 8th in the nation in political science. And Douglas Simon was the head of the department then. And I was excited to do that. And just found as I took the classes, I felt like it wasn't part of what my passion was, which was literature and studying the great writers. And so I switched to English literature, and I felt more comfortable in that path. I think that Drew did a very fine job of preparing me just for what I would call, you know, the very real world out there, because they gave me a balanced curriculum. I wanted to do English, but they said, oh, you have to do computer science, you have to do, you know, foreign languages, you should probably do some religion. So I had counselors pushing and guiding me and balancing my curriculum. And I have to say today that, you know, I'm very, very grateful for the path that I took in coming to Drew and the preparation that I had. After Drew, it was a little tough trying to find a position. So I came back and worked in the library for a little while and decided that I would go to grad school. And didn't really know at the time that, you know, the economy wasn't going to be that great. And so I said, well, I'm going to put off law school because I was also dealing with some family situations with my grandmother. I cared for her And I said, I'll just go and do a master's program. And at the same time, I got a temporary position to do legal technology at a law firm, Carter and English in Newark, New Jersey. And what it did was it exposed me to a field that is very niche today, and it's e-discovery. And, I'm litigation support project manager now at a firm in the Wall Street area, Stroke on the Van, where I've been for the past 15 years. And I think that, what I've done and what I saw in that first temporary assignment that I received from my agency was that I could take two careers and merge them into one. And that is what I did. So at the time, I enrolled at Montclair State University in their graduate school for legal information management. And a little ways into the program, I said, I need to add some computer science. I need to go to computer school. Well, I guess about 1 year in, I lost my temporary assignment due to 9/11. And what the unemployment office in New York did for people who lost their jobs in 9/11 was gave them the opportunity to go to school and get funding. And what I did during that master's program, while I was doing the master's program, I took the money that New York was giving out and went to computer school. And so 3 days a week I was doing my master's program, and 2 days a week I was going to computer school. And so I learned that, I needed to know computers for what I was doing, but I needed to know the law too, as well. And I needed to know how to analyze it and apply it to what I was doing. So going back to that first position I held, even as just a temp job, I learned that what they were doing in law firms was trying to take a process that was taking months and months and months for attorneys to do and make it electronic. Essentially take it and put a technical spiel on it and get attorneys to review documents, voluminous amounts of documents in a shorter amount of time, saving, them, the client's money and so forth. And so it was in its very early stages then, but I knew then where it was going. And I knew that it was going to get more robust. And with the growth of data in the world today, especially with email and the way people communicate today, I knew that this was going somewhere. So that's why I did what I did with the master's program and going to computer school, because what it did was before I even graduated, I went on an interview with this same law firm that I'm working for now, and they couldn't believe what I had done. They never had even heard of a legal information management program anywhere, but I had found one in New Jersey. And they hired me before I graduated. And I've been there ever since. The position has been very rewarding. It has given me, a very stark outlook on what it is to be in the legal profession. We talk about what doctors do in terms of hours, but I've pulled some really, really, really heavy hours working as a litigation support professional. I've worked my way up from analyst to coordinator, and now I'm a project manager and looking to go on into management of departments in different law firms, or even director. And I just interviewed for Sullivan Cromwell, which is like a top 10 law firm here in the city. But I didn't think that when I started, it would be as much work in terms of hours. So, in my 20s and 30s, I really didn't think about, settling down or getting married or anything, because I was doing 18-hour days. I was doing trials that were in Texas. I was pulling all-nighters all the time, and it would have just been impossible. So I'm glad that I got into the field and I was able to sort of, pay my dues, as I would say, early on. I've watched the industry grow, but as it's grown, I've gotten more, I'm more of a senior level professional in this. And so I'm really grateful for what Drew has done for me in terms of, like I said, giving me this balanced education. I did the English major, you know, I was exposed to poli-sci, but I took computer science at Drew as well. And I didn't think I would ever be doing anything with computers. I knew I liked them, I had an interest in them. And when I started Drew, Drew was one of the first schools to, upon admission, give their students laptops. And that was like unheard of at the time. And it was, you know, it's a really great perk. And so I was telling people, you know, I got into Drew and they gave us laptops and it was so cool. And everybody was walking around with these big laptops. But if you could have seen how big these laptops were, they were probably the weight of a PC, what a PC is today. They were pretty huge. I think I'm telling my age right now, but that's what the process was upon, you know, being admitted to Drew and just attending there and becoming, you know, a student, a full-time student. But so I'm thankful for that. So I'm open to questions. I'm still working now. I just got off with an attorney in Miami and, you know, helping them get into, you know, our systems with what's going on now with the coronavirus. Everybody's working remotely. And so I'm dealing with, you know, attorneys in LA, I'm dealing with attorneys in Miami, and I'm dealing with attorneys in New York. And I'm getting all these documents from different law firms, putting them in databases so they can search them. And they have, you know, all of these responses to answer. And so I'm helping them to adjust to this time and the season that we're in professionally. And so in all, it's rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a question from someone, and I thank you for asking this question. We have someone who asked what the GRE is. And this is, I'm sure, a new acronym for some of you since it is so new to the law school world. The GRE is another standardized graduate school entrance exam. It stands for the Graduate Record Examination. It tests similar information, but in a different way. So I like to tell the story about my panic attack when I opened my LSAT and the very first question was an excerpt from a biology textbook. My joke at the time was I'm going to law school, not math or science school. So the GRE actually has math and simple calculations on it. Toya, did you take the GRE for any of your graduate programs?
Yes, I did. I did take it for Montclair State. They did require that I take it.
Do you want to share with the attendees what the different parts of the exam are, if you can remember?
I can't remember. I think it was just too long ago, but I do remember the mathematics. I know they had comprehension, but not much more.
Okay, so there is a writing section, a reading comprehension section, and what is called the quant section. It's the quantitative section. And that is a section where there will be some simple calculations, some simple math. Both tests are trying to gauge your ability to reach logically different conclusions. They are just coming at them in different ways. The main differences between the two tests are the LSAT is given only on specific days. It's administered by the LSAC. The GRE is given much more frequently. You can go to a testing center and take a test pretty much anytime you want, and you can take it, if you aren't happy with your score, you can take it again more quickly than you can take the LSAT. So there are a growing number of schools who are accepting the GRE now, but something to keep in mind, because it is a smaller number of schools, if you were looking at schools that are outside of sort of the handful that are taking the GRE, your LSAT score will be reported to all schools whether you take the GRE or not. So in the New York area, for example, I know Cardozo, Columbia, NYU, Brooklyn, and then Seton Hall are taking the GRE. There may be a few others. But if you want to apply to a school in Pennsylvania that isn't taking the GRE and you take the LSAT, all of us that you're submitting your GRE score to will also see the LSAT, so something to keep in mind. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? I have a question that asked, for those of us that went to law school, what did you do as you got towards the end of your time in school to start preparing for the bar exam? So Jonathan, why don't we start with you?
So, well, one of the first things I did was I enrolled in a class at Rutgers during my spring semester of my third year called Fundamentals of Legal Analysis. And it was kind of like first of all, it was a pass-fail, sort of like a bar prep class to give students a feel for what the exam might be like. And so we were given, hypothetical essays. We did them in, we did like 3 in a succession because of course, a lot of us were used to taking, law school exams, which are much different than how the actual bar exam is. And it felt kind of like a boot camp in a way, just to get you used to the feel of what it's like to be taking the test under those conditions. Just for example's sake, my complex civil litigation class was a 24-hour take-home essay where I basically had to write a brief. And now I get 20-page briefs and I write them over the span of a week because I have other things I have to do. But the bar itself, at least when I took it in July 2015, and I was one of the last groups to take the original New Jersey bar exam, it was 6 essay questions over the span of like 3 hours and 200 multiple choice questions on like 6 different areas of law for the MBE, also over the course of 3 hours, I believe, morning and afternoon, I think. I can't remember 5 years ago. I can barely remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but anyway, you get the idea. When I graduated, one of the things you'll find is that sort of like with college review for the SAT, I'm pretty sure they still do that for the SAT. I was supposed to have my 10-year anniversary at Drew this year and it got canceled. So that shows you how old I am. But anyway, there's test prep programs and you'll find that they'll have some people on campus that will try and get you interested and involved in signing up for those programs early on, because a lot of them have first and second year coursework that will prepare you in advance for the bar on like very general subjects. The companies that I think are presently out there, Barbry's been around for a while, Themis, Kaplan. Kaplan has a bar program. Kaplan does a lot of things. I use Barbry, but I also supplemented my bar study with actual questions that were released on previous administrations of the bar exam. Even though they were older, I felt like that was a more representative feel for what the actual bar exam was like. And I feel like to describe what bar study is like is kind of early in this phase. It's sort of like one of those, let's cross that bridge when you get there, because right now your priority should be doing well on the LSAT and then law school. And so, I think Katya, based on your based on your position, you're in a better position to discuss what the LSAT is like than I am. But I hope that is a sufficient answer based on my experience.
Thanks, everyone. Let's see. Lina, what did you do as you got towards the end of your time at law school to start switching mentally to prepare yourself for the bar exam? I know you said in an earlier answer that you took some classes that you knew were going to be on the bar exam. Did you find that helpful?
I did. I remember specifically I took evidence and criminal procedure because I knew that they would be on the bar exam. So I did find that helpful. And then, like Jonathan said, I also took the review courses. So I did Barbry that prepared me for the New York bar exam. And then they gave me a supplement for New Jersey. And then they also assisted with the multi-state exam, which for the students on this on the call, the bar exam is split up into 2 days, or at least it was. And one was the MBE day, and which was a multiple choice test all day. And then the other day was the essays. And then if you did another state, you would then do those essays the following day. So I took some courses that I thought would help me in law school. And then I did the bar review class. And I also did a supplement for the multi-state bar exam as well. So I was pretty busy making sure that I would pass that test. But if people are asking that question, and it's because they think that the test is just very difficult and it could be, you might, not pass, I would say that I really think that if you study hard, you do what you're supposed to do, the odds are that you will pass it. So I wouldn't worry about it, like Jonathan said, right now.
Great. So I have one last question that came in via text, and I think after this question, we are going to open it up, since the numbers have dwindled, and allow you to raise your hands and ask your own questions. But before we get to that, someone asked, they have an interest in becoming a forensic psychologist, and they were wondering if any of you work with forensic psychologists and what you do. And assuming the follow-up to that question would be, would having that background be helpful in any of your careers? How about you, Emily? Do you work at all with forensic psychologists?
I haven't worked with a forensic psychologist at all. We do work with various experts in other types of forensics. I can imagine we might work with a forensic psychologist at some point for a specific case. Anytime we're going to work with any type of expert along those lines, it depends on the case and what's going on. We did have a recent rape trial in Tompkins County where one of the witnesses that testified was someone, and I don't remember his exact credentials, it wasn't my case, but that individual testified to his expertise in trauma-informed interviewing and why people react the way they do in certain traumatic circumstances. So, but in terms of whether or not that would be helpful to have in terms of a legal background, I can imagine it would be, but specifically, no, in my situation. I think that when we would need an expertise along those lines, we would look for an expert. It wouldn't necessarily be helpful for the specifics of a career, at least that I can see in my area of the law.
What about you, Jonathan? I don't think either of our in-house representatives have much interaction with forensic psychologists, but what about you? You are an assistant prosecutor, right?
Right, and my answer, for better or worse, is basically the same as Emily's, in that I'm also fairly new to my office, so I've only had a very limited amount of experience in working with experts, more so forensic psychologists. Was the compound question to that, like, how would that background be beneficial in a law career, Katya?
Yeah, so, I always say when I'm at these presentations that you can have any major you want when you're applying to law school.
That's absolutely right.
I think sometimes people feel pressure to do criminal justice or pre-law or poli-sci. So I know you had some interesting minor, you were a minor in theater, right? So having a different background brings a different perspective.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I champion diversity in the profession itself. I mean, by way of my background, my mother's a Colombian immigrant, my dad is a Jew from Queens. So I got a lot going on here. Anyway, that being said, as far as ethnic diversity goes, intellectual diversity, I think, is absolutely crucial in the profession because the law affects every area of our lives. And the one thing that I think a liberal arts education gives you, regardless of what you study, and that is absolutely essential to succeeding in law school, is critical thinking skills. If you're an English major, you're going to be doing, critical analysis of literature, of poetry, of language. The same thing goes for language majors. If you're taking classes that involve Spanish, French, or Chinese literature, if you're studying science, you know, critical thinking is involved when you're trying to generate hypotheses about whether something is going to work or not work. It's the same thing when we're determining how things are going to go with a case, because facts in law can win or lose cases, and sometimes we have to make that decision. If we do this, is the case going to go this way? If we do that, is the case going to go that way? And sometimes things can just happen like right out of the blue. Like with coronavirus, my office is getting bombarded with all these motions to have a lot of criminal defendants released who were already detained pre-trial, and that's affecting one of my cases. I'm not going to go into the details, but just to give you an idea of how things can happen like so suddenly, and you have to be prepared to think on your feet and think critically about how to deal with those situations. And so I think having a liberal arts education, no matter what you study, I mean, what I think you wanted to address, Katya, you know, theater, you know, that of course involves, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Extroversion skills, public speaking, also a bit of critical analysis if you're working on plays. I mean, I could go on and on, but I mean, the bottom line is critical thinking is a fundamental skill to being a lawyer. And if you're good at it, you're already, you know, well on your way. Okay.
So Carol, I think we're ready to maybe open the mics up. We have a question from Julia that she just sent. So I'm actually going to let her ask her question.
Julia, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, I was wondering, what is it like to be a prosecutor, and how is it balancing life and your workload? Especially you come across a variety of cases, such as anywhere from traffic tickets to things more serious. So how, if that impacts you in any way?
So Jonathan, you can go ahead and answer that question since that's your current role.
Sure. I think part of the question got cut off, so bear with me if I don't answer all of it. I apologize. I love being a prosecutor. I mean, obviously the hours are great, the benefits are great. My job is much more of a 9 to 5, but I give myself flexibility in that if I need to get an assignment done, you know, I'm more than willing to, you know, push through on it, just as if like I were, you know, back at Drew and trying to finish, you know, a term paper on Saturday night. Yeah, I was a nerd. Anyway, I don't deal a whole lot with actual traffic tickets. That's more municipal court. I may deal with them if it involves, you know, a municipal court appeal, which when they bring, when a defendant doesn't like a decision that was made by the judge in the municipal court, and so they appeal it, and then it comes up to the Superior Court Criminal Division where I work, and then I have to argue, you know, why the lower court's decision, you know, was fair and should be affirmed. I don't really deal so much with that. I deal with people who have been charged with felony and certain misdemeanor offenses, for instance, like domestic violence, simple assaults, criminal mischief, things like that. You know, that the stuff that's a little more serious than what you hear from your friends may or may not go on in municipal courts. But I also love being part of a team. My unit is consists of myself, 2 other prosecutors, I have 1 detective and 2 paralegals, and we're very close. A lot of the other units, in fact, the entire office is, we get along very well, thankfully. And it's great. It's great. It's a great feeling to be able to go to anybody in my office. I can't say that is that pertains to every prosecutor's office, but mine were pretty close-knit. I am not afraid to go to anybody more senior than me and ask them a question about something with regards to like, how do I, what's the best way to go about doing this direct examination, or I've got this appeal, do you think we should move forward on it? Should we file this motion, that, blah, blah, blah. My office, it definitely fosters an environment of building attorneys up. And I like that kind of atmosphere. When I was in a private firm, my boss was a lot more like, figure it out on your own, and that didn't really work for me. That's kind of the culture for a lot of places. And so you kind of just have to figure out what works best for you in terms of if you're more suited for that high-paced, learn on your feet environment. I'm more of like okay, let me sit back and just sort of absorb everything and then learn by observation, so to speak. If I teach things to myself, it's like trial and error. But no, I definitely love my job. I enjoy the benefits that come with it. I enjoy the time. I enjoy learning the litigation skills in the 3 years that I've been there, because if I decide to move on someplace else, they're easily transferable to something, whether it's private or something more higher in government, like the Attorney General or the U.S. Attorney's Office. And it also gives me a lot of flexibility to do stuff like I'm doing right now. In fact, I sit on 2 other professional boards. Emily and I were the co-chairs of the lawyers affinity group here at Drew as well. And so it's also afforded me a lot more time to be involved and give back to current undergraduate students. I didn't have that luxury when I was in private practice because I was constantly working.
Emily, what about you? Do you want to share some of your experiences?
Sure. So my office is what's called the vertical office. We have 9 prosecutors, including the district attorney, 5 support staff, and 3 investigators. I handle a number of what are called local courts. So there are smaller local courts where it's misdemeanors, so you can serve up to a year in jail for those. And you do get traffic tickets there. Those are usually just dealt with in the moment. It's when someone shows up to court and they want to plea, I can make an offer to them if I want to make that offer. We don't actually handle traffic trials. We're just there for the local court night. And so I handle those local courts. I currently have 3 local courts that I have to go to once a month, that anywhere from an hour to 3 hours, that one appearance just to deal with. And the caseload can vary. I have a large number of misdemeanor cases that cycle through those courts. I also have our integrated domestic violence court, where I deal with all of our cases that have both a family court track and a domestic violence court track. While I'm not handling the family court track, I am aware of what's going on in those cases, and they do have the same judge. And then I handle felonies, which can range anywhere from financial crimes to domestic violence crimes to crimes of violence, to both family-based and non-family-based. And so I handle those all the way through trial, from the presentment to grand jury and the indictment, up any motion practice, and then up through a trial if it goes to trial. And then I also do handle appellate work. So if a case is appealed beyond our local trial court, our county court, up to the 3rd department in New York State, then I would handle that appeal. I've actually got one I'm working on right now, which is good, because while I'm working from home, most of our courts have actually moved to virtual court for what they're considering to be essential appearances only, which is mostly cases they need to move along. To answer your question of how you balance it, it's a little bit of triage. It's figuring which are most important and need the most amount of your time, and generally that's my felonies. And though my misdemeanor domestic violence cases do also take quite a bit of time and are important for me to pay attention to, because they're cases that could lead to a larger level of violence. But it's triage, it's determining what needs your importance, it's your attention. It's something you're already doing in college. It's figuring out what needs the most time and attention and making sure you're spending your time and attention on those matters that require the most amount of attention, and what cases you might need to just pass along. It is a family-friendly, generally, for me, in terms of being able to get home and have dinner with my kids every night, less so than when I was in a law firm, where I would sometimes be at work until the wee hours of the next morning. And it's also different in that you're not billing in the same level. While I still have to account for my time and make sure I'm putting in enough time, I'm not having to bill out to a client, which is something that for all of us who would practice at a law firm, the billable hour rules and can be very daunting at times, because you are tracking your time in 6-minute increments. Even if you stop to take a break, you're not on the clock anymore, and that is one of the things that they will be looking at, and that will determine your compensation and your success at a law firm. So that's something to keep in mind. But overall, it's just paying attention and figuring out what is an issue that needs to demand your attention at that moment, something that I think both Lina and Colin were speaking to in terms of being in-house counsel.
Great. So if any of you have questions, you can either continue to type them to me and I will acknowledge you that way, or you can raise your hand and I'll be able to see that and I can acknowledge you that way. We've gone through all the questions that were sent to me in advance. So if you're shy to ask a question yourself, I am absolutely happy to ask on your behalf. We've got these fantastic panelists here, so let's take advantage of their expertise and see what else we can share with the group. Are there any other questions? Anyone?
You can all unmute yourself now if you have a question.
Did we do that good a job that we got all the questions answered and under the time limit? Maybe we're all just more efficient now that we're working from home. Okay, Carol, I don't think we want to force anyone to stay here if they've got no more questions, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So I know that I am happy to answer any additional questions you may have, especially if it is about the application process. That is my area of expertise, so you can reach out to anyone in the office. Carol, Greg knows me well. They can put you in touch with me. I'm happy to answer questions. But I just want to give all of our panelists a round of applause. Thank you for joining me in my living room for this fantastic panel. I love coming back to Drew. This is definitely a very strange way for me to be back at Drew, but I'm happy to be here chatting with all of you. Does any of the panelists want to say anything before we sign off?
Well, I want to add my thanks to all of you. This was really great. It's our first of 5. We have 4 more career community panels coming. You were our guinea pigs. Thank you for being our guinea pigs on that. But we wanted to make sure we could offer some virtual opportunities for our students to connect with alums, and I appreciate you guys stepping up to be the first ones.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah, thanks to the students for joining us. We appreciate it.
Get back to your video games, Colin.
Been keeping my eye on the clock the whole time.
If I may, just wanted to say, feel free to reach out to any of us on Drew Connect if you have any further questions after this, or if you're interested in going down any of our specific career paths. I mean, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
You can also come to the Career Center virtually.
When you're allowed back.
That's great. Yeah. Sorry, I'm spotlighting the wrong people.
Please don't go right now.
Do not go to the Career Center right now.
You know, I will say, if I can just offer a little hot tip right now, law schools and I assume other graduate schools have a lot more virtual stuff that we have created in the last 3 weeks available on our website. So if there are schools that are a little bit further away that might be of interest to you, now is a good time to go check to see if there's virtual tours or virtual interviews with faculty and students that you can watch that typically isn't a part of the law school website. So definitely you can check it out. I know we have a virtual tour that we were lucky to have filmed over the summer that we were able to push through editing way quicker than we thought we could up on our website. And I know my colleagues at other schools are being equally creative in getting content up that approximates the opportunity to walk through the school, walk through the area, get a chance to meet faculty and students. So now's a good time, even if you're still 3 or 4 years out in the process, to start to check us all out and get a feel for what the campus might be like.
And definitely watch Drew today for the next panels that are coming up. There are 4 more. I might as well do a quick ad about them. On Monday, we have a multidisciplinary science, technology, engineering, and a business and entrepreneurship panel. After that, we have arts, communications, and languages. After that, we will have a social impact, education, law, and government. And then our final one will be business, finance, and entrepreneurship. So definitely check out Drew today. Check out the SAA Instagram. It'll be posted everywhere. It should be in Drew this week also. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good
Stay safe.
night.
Good night.